2017 regular school board meeting. Can I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Craig?
Here.
Mr. Estheimer?
Here.
Mr. Freitas?
Here.
Mr. Green?
Present.
Mr. Koopser?
Here.
Ms. Reed, is she excused?
Not excused.
Okay. Dr. Pomponio?
Here. Okay, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Southgate Community Schools mission statement is Learning for Life. Vision statement is Southgate Community Schools, the best choice for students and parents. Revisions or approval of the agenda, please.
Madam President, I move that we revise the agenda to move the student government representatives to item F before presentations or citizen comments, so the students can go home.
Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Green and a support by Mr. Koopser to revise the agenda, to switch G with H. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay, are there any citizen comments? Okay. Moving on to student government representative. So we have Mr. Moon. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Alex Moon, and I am the president of the Promethean chapter of Davidson Middle School's National Junior Honor Society. On the behalf of my school, I would like to introduce our officers and advisors. We have Vice President Brooke Goudreau and our treasurer, Sierra Melendez. Joining us this evening, we have co-advisors Mrs. Shannon Lavis and Mrs. Nicole Sledish. To be eligible for National Junior Honor Society, a student must have a high academic average. The high average, however, is only one element of consideration. The other four elements of consideration are outstanding character, citizenship, leadership, and service. These are the cornerstones of membership in the National Junior Honor Society. The purpose of this society is to promote these 5 ideals. Our goal is to encourage others to aspire to scholarly habits, to develop qualities of citizenship, to enlist in worthy services, to lead in new ways, and to demonstrate qualities of character. Our first ideal we would like to share is scholarship. Scholarship means a commitment to learning. A student is committed to spending hours reading and studying, knowing the lasting benefits of this type of hard work. We should continue to learn in our daily lives and share it with those around us. Knowledge is one great element in life, which leads us to the highest success. This success can be acquired in only one way, through diligence and effort. Members have the opportunity to continually expand their world through their dedication and scholarship. Vice President Brooke Goudreau will now be telling us our ideals of citizenship and service.
Citizenship is an obligation each member of our society has to live up to that was provided by our founding fathers. These are the responsibilities we have to our home, community, our state, and our nation. As good citizens, we must live up to the laws and guidelines that unite us as a civilized society. Good citizens work together to improve not only our lives, but the lives of those around us. Good citizenship requires that we remain strong and vigilant in protecting the freedoms and rights that have been granted to us. We, as members of the National Junior Honor Society, are called to live up to these high standards of citizenship. Service can be described in many ways. In our daily lives, there are countless opportunities for us to help others by giving service. A willingness to work for the benefit of those in need without recognition is a service we seek in our members. We are committed to the idea of volunteering our time and abilities for a hope of a better tomorrow. Some of our service is coordinated right here with the City of Southgate. We are planning to assist with decorating City Hall for Christmas, helping with the annual Easter egg hunt, and helping with the holiday train rides at Kiwanis Park. We are thankful for the opportunity to make a difference right here in our own community. Treasurer Sierra Melendez will now tell us about the ideals of leadership and character.
Leadership should command an influence in the school. In class and school activities, the real leaders strive to train and assist others to reach the same goal. The price of leadership is sacrifice. It is a willingness to set aside one's personal interest for the interest of others. A leader has self-confidence and will go forward when others hesitate. No matter what resources we have, we can be powerless without the guidance of a wise leader. Leadership is always needed and is expected from each of our members. Character is the force within each individual which distinguishes us from others. It gives us our individuality. With character, we can respect ourselves and attain the respect of others. It is this force which guides us through life and, once developed, allows us to grow steadily. Character is achieved and not received. It is the product of constant action, daily striving to make the right choice. We must control how we wish to appear to others. By demonstrating such qualities as respect, responsibility, trustworthiness, fairness, caring, and citizenship, we may hope to prove by example that we value character. President Moon will now share our activities and events that are planned for this year.
Last Friday, we took a field trip to Henry Ford Museum in Greenfield Village. We are now able to enjoy the great fall day and see the sights. We have several celebrations planned that include a pizza party and an ice cream social. Our most exciting field trip is an overnight trip to the Windy City of Chicago. This great opportunity is something that students will remember for a lifetime. We would like to thank you for inviting us to speak at the board meeting this evening. We hope you enjoyed our National Junior Honor Society presentation, and we welcome any questions that you may have for us or our advisors.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Okay. Thank you and congratulations on your new positions.
And happy birthday, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to presentations, we have the 2016-17 audit report with Yo and Yo, Mrs. Christy Kraft-Belsky. Thank you.
A little bit taller than the last presenter, so I'll move that up just a bit. Teresa's getting set up. While she's doing that, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Christy Kraft-Belsky with the audit firm of Yo and Yo. We're pleased to be chosen to conduct your audit again this year. I was the in charge on the audit this year. Mike Georges, who typically presents to you, had a conflict this evening, so he asked me to present in his place.
Thank you.
I know Teresa provided the audited financial statements and the single audit and the governance letter to you. I don't know how much you were able to read through, but I do know that several of you, this is probably your first audit presentation since there are a few new faces on the board. So I will go through some of the information as to what we do as part of our audit. Here it comes. And what we do is we take a look at your internal controls and we look at the processes that are in place relating to cash disbursements, cash receipts, payroll, pension expense, and we evaluate those internal controls in place. From there, we do a risk assessment to determine what are the areas of risk in the account balances, and we tailor our procedures to address those risks. As part of those procedures, we examine documents. We perform analytical analysis by developing some expectations and then looking at those analytics to see if they've met our expectations. We also follow an asset and liability approach where we take a look at the trial balance and we go through and look at all of the material assets and liabilities that are reported as of June 30th and do testing on those balances to make sure that they're correct. And then finally, as an audit firm, we're subject to a peer review. So once every 3 years, another CPA firm comes in and reviews our systems to make sure that what we're doing is correct and meets the standards. So we had our most recent peer review in December of last year, and we received a pass on that peer review indicating that we are following all of the standards. As part of our audit, we really provide 3 different reports to you. One of which is the auditor's report on financial statements, and so we take a look at the district as a whole and develop an opinion on those financial statements. Secondly, because of the level of federal dollars that you receive, about $3.3 million in federal expenditures this year, you're required to have what we call a single audit, and we report on the expenditures of federal awards. And then we select one of your federal programs to test to make sure that you're meeting all of the compliance requirements that you're required to. So this year we tested the IDEA program, the special education program, or cluster as it's called, and we did not have any findings related to that, and that equated to about $1.6 million in expenditures. And then finally, the third report that we issue is one of the items that were required under our audit standards, just to have certain required communications with the board. Within that communications letter, we talk about if there's any significant estimates within the financial statements. The estimates within your financial statements are the useful lives of fixed assets, the net pension liability, and the estimate for compensated absences. Additionally, within that report, we tell you some of the standards that have been adopted. So this year, we adopted a standard that's related to tax abatements, and so there's a footnote disclosure relating to any tax abatements that the district is impacted by. And then also, we're required to tell you if there's any difficulties in performing the audit, which we did not have any. Teresa and Leslie and the staff is a pleasure to work with as we're conducting the audit. They place the audit Teresa's a former auditor, so she knows exactly what we're going through. But they meet all of our requests in a very timely manner, and it's a very smooth process because they dedicate so much of their time to the preparation of that. So we appreciate that. As part of our audit, we would tell you if there's any corrected or uncorrected misstatements that needed to be made. There was only one adjustment, and it was determined to be immaterial. It was related to the 147C money that the district gets from the state. So we do have a management recommendation to management this year. The state provides a rate. However, that rate does not equate to actual dollars because of the timing of how it's calculated. So our recommendation is just to evaluate if the state rate is appropriate or if it's maybe possible to come up with your own internal rate. As I mentioned, the adjustment was not material to the financial statements, and so it's a management comment that we issued. It's nothing significant, a significant deficiency or a material weakness or anything along those lines. We did not have any disagreements with management. We requested certain representations from management. Basically, they told us that they let us know everything we needed to know in order to come up with our opinion. There were no consultations with other accountants. There were no audit findings that came up outside of the normal course of the audit. And then we had one additional management comment relating to fund balance. Now that you're in a position where you have a positive fund balance, it's a good position to be in. There are certain fund balance policies where you can determine if an expense is eligible to be spent with either restricted dollars or unrestricted dollars, that the restricted dollars should be used first. So there's just some wording that we would recommend that now that you have a fund balance to kind of incorporate that into your policy. So it's an issue that you haven't had to deal with too much in the past, and so now that you have that as some fund balance built up, then you can include that in your policy as well.
I just wanted to add
Yes.
with the comment about the 147C, which is the UAL revenue that we receive, and then we have to pay the money back, but we have to record the retirement expense based on the adjustment. I did make the adjustment. It was immaterial, but it was made on the books, and I have already changed my procedures in evaluating the internal rate that we have to use.
Thank you.
All right, on to the next slide. The biggest piece that you're looking at when you have an audit is the opinion. So when you look at the financial statements that were provided to you, it's in that first section. Because you have an audit, it's considered the highest level of assurance, and our opinion states that the school's financial records and statements are fairly and appropriately presented and in accordance with accounting principles generally accepted in the United States of America. This includes the design, implementation, and maintenance of internal control relevant to the preparation and after your presentation of the financial statements that are free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error. So as you can see, when we have a positive opinion or an unmodified opinion, as we call it, or a clean opinion in layman's terms, which is what you have, that it is free from material misstatement. So that's the type of opinion you want to receive. On to the next slide. This is a snapshot in time at the end of your fiscal year, June 30, 2017, your assets and liabilities and fund balance. So there's just a couple things that I wanted to point out. One of the first things we look at is to see if your total assets are more than your total liabilities in the general fund, indicating that you have enough assets to pay off all of your liabilities. And you can see that it is in excess, or assets are in excess of liabilities. I also wanted to point out in the special education program, that's a fund that does not carry a fund balance because revenues equal expenditures each year. And then the capital projects fund, as you're in the midst of working on those projects, at the end of June 30, 2017, there's about $9.9 million left to be spent in those capital projects funds. And then the non-major funds are everything else. So that's the cafeteria fund, the community service fund, and the debt service fund is what's combined in that non-major governmental funds. And then on the next slide, this is the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance. And I want to draw your attention to the general fund. You had a positive change in fund balance of $1.7 million. So that took your fund balance from $374,000 to about $2.1 million. So definitely in a better comfort zone than you have been in the past. As I mentioned, the Special Education Center program does not carry a fund balance, and you can see in the capital projects funds this year, there was about $8.6 million of expenditures relating to those capital projects. The non-major governmental funds also added to fund balance by about $103,000. And then on the next slide, just to give you a comparative, the balance sheet of the general fund, total assets this year were $13.07 million compared to $13.9 last year. So down just a little bit, but your liabilities are much less, with almost $11 million in liabilities compared to $13.5 million last year. Resulting in, as I mentioned, that fund balance increasing from $374,000 up to $2.1 million.
The major reason for the liabilities decreasing is the reduction in our state aid note. During 16-17, our state aid note decreased by over $1.8 million.
And then when you're comparing to budget, this is something that the boards usually like to see, the budget that you've approved, just to see how close that you are. Your original budget planned to add $232,000 to your fund balance. The final budget increased it to $1.4 million being added, and actual was $1.7 million. So your budget to actual variance was 0.02% for revenues and 0.76% for expenditures. So that's pretty good when you're dealing with, a $40 million budget. So congratulations on that. And I believe the biggest increase from the original to the final would be the Wayne RESA. Is that correct?
The enhancement millage and the sale of the Corman property.
So then as you're looking at revenues and expenses this year compared to last year, as you can see, your revenues were up about $1.2 million, as we just mentioned, mostly because of the Wayne RESA enhancement millage. That was about almost $1.4 million there. Expenditures increased slightly by about $437,000. And then as we're taking a look at revenue, just to see, so you can see where the major sources come from, 73.7 comes from the state, 5.4% comes from federal, and this is just related to the general fund. And inter-district is about 2.5 million or 6%, and the local is about 5.5 million or 13.4%, and property taxes mostly. And then when you're looking at expenditures, salaries and benefits make up the biggest piece of the pie at about almost 82% of your expenditures are related to people. 12.6% of your expenses are related to purchased services. And then supplies and materials make up about 2.8, and then capital outlay and other and transfers make up the remaining pieces of what your expenditures are related to. And then when you're looking, oh, that's interesting. My chart says something different, but the biggest blue piece is related to instruction, and that's almost $24.5 million, or 61.9%. Supporting services is about almost $13.5 million, or 34.2%. Other is just over $1 million at 2.6%, and transfers are about 512%, or 1.3% of the budget. Sometimes the PowerPoint, depending on the version, it does that. I've noticed that in the past.
Well, and
but-
your copies did come from this file, so, and all the numbers are on your copies, so I don't know what happened.
Yeah, I don't know what happens. On occasion, the PowerPoint version does that. This next slide is interesting to take a look at the per pupil analysis of general fund revenues, expenditures, and transfers. So some of the future slides that we're going to look at are going to take a closer look at this. But on a per pupil basis, for revenues, it was about $10,225 in revenue per pupil, and expenditures were $9,789. And then we'll go to the next slide. And one thing that you'll notice, this is probably my least favorite slide, yours too, I'm sure, in this presentation, is the enrollment trend. And you can see that that's trending downwards. So regardless of what those revenues, expenditures are, if they're staying consistent with last year, when that enrollment goes down, it's always going to look like your per pupil revenue and expenditure is going to go up. So just be aware of that as you're taking a look at those trends. On the next slide, the foundation allowance from the state, you can see that has gradually increased. In 2017, you received $7,511 per pupil. In 2018, is slated to be $7,631 per pupil that you'll be receiving. And the next slide is probably my favorite slide because it shows such a positive picture of where you've come over the last 7 years. You can see in 2013 was where the deficit was at its highest point at almost $5 million. And since then, you can see that you obviously have grown out of that deficit to get to that fund balance that we mentioned, which is a positive last year and then even larger this year. The next slide gives you a little bit of perspective. General fund balance is a percentage of expenditures. Michigan Department of Education releases these statistics so you can kind of compare yourself with your peers. And that 4,000 to 4,499 pupils, the average was actually a negative 0.26% for the 15-16 year. The 16-17 data hasn't all been reported yet, so we're looking back a year based on what was reported at the end of last year. Also, to show a comparative, the peers in the 4,500 to the $5,000 pupil or 5,000 pupil count is at 13.65%. So you were below that category. I did look, and I believe there's about 10 or 11 districts within each one of those categories to compare to. So it'll be interesting to see once everything's reported for 16-17 where you'll fall in comparison with your increase in fund balance. And then the next slide is just to kind of remind you that some of the expenditures are out of your control. The MIPSR's rate history, currently 25.56% of payroll is related to MIPSR, so those are required payments that need to be made into the MIPSR's plan for pension and OPEB. And you can see where that has been over the last several years. And then finally, some of the future challenges that you're faced with, and we understand that and obviously are aware of that with our experience with school districts and, build that into our procedures, but just things for you to be aware of. The state economic and political condition, and really that almost could be taken to a federal level too. Who knows what some of those federal changes may be as well. Retirement rate increases, you're subject to whatever those MIPSR's rates are paying in. The state revenue fluctuations, we talked about the enrollment trends decreasing, rising healthcare costs. Within your financial statements, we were required 2 years ago to start putting on what they determined Southgate's proportion of the pension liability and that MIPSR's plan is, which is about $70 million. For next year, we're required to put the OPEB on as well. So those other post-retirement benefit plan, post-retirement post-benefit plans, we have to put those additional liabilities on there too. So it doesn't paint a picture for each individual district, but it is something that, as your bonding agencies are looking at, they are aware of that those liabilities do exist, and they are taking that into consideration when they're looking at the financials as well. And then there's always new accounting pronouncements, as I mentioned, that OPEB that's coming up, and then any other changes that may come about too. So those are just some of the future challenges that we're willing to work with you to try and make sure that we're ahead of the game and make sure that everything is reported in the financial statements correctly. Any questions for me on any of the information that was presented?
Yes. Sorry,
go
Madam
ahead,
President.
Mr. Kuzma.
Sorry, thank you. As it relates to the internal control recommendations that you had in the cover letter, and I see the 147C expenditures, of which Mrs. Grahowski has already addressed, that she's already made a directional change in how she works with that percentage and the reconciliation of that. With the fund balance policy, were those, and I think that our policy committee will come back and need to take that. I'm trying to understand the level of risk as it relates to internal controls that we have with that, and were there anything other than those two that maybe I didn't see?
As we're taking a look at controls, we go throughout the audit, we kind of have a list of anything that may come up, and then we evaluate are any of them considered what we would call a verbal comment, which we may just discuss with them, or something that actually does get in writing. And there really were no major issues that came up. As I mentioned, you could tell that there's a strong level of tone at the top, as we call it, from an audit perspective. They ask us to rotate some of the areas that they've got concerns with you that we look at as well. And from the district perspective and the policies and procedures that we evaluated, there weren't any other items of concern that we found.
Is there a reference as to what internal controls you did find in terms of, other than the two that were recommended, but I mean, it's kind of just trying to have an understanding besides the tone at the top and that there are policies out there. I just kind of, those are.
You mean as far as what we look at and,
Yeah.
and what we go through?
What you look for and what you
Yep,
found, and
sure.
just having an understanding of what's going on within
Yep.
the board office as it relates to internal controls for better
Yep.
comfort, just trying to understand that.
So what we do is we take a look and say, any transaction that hits the district's financial statements, what process did that go through? And so there's a couple main processes. Payroll, obviously, when you've got 86 or 83% of your expenditures running through payroll. So for example, for that, we take what we call a walkthrough. And so we say, all right, is there a contract in place? We'll pick an individual. Is there a contract in place? Is that person salaried or hourly? Is there approval processes to indicate that person actually did work those, specific hours? How is it determined which general ledger expense account they go to? And so we go through what we call each of our assertions to see, is there any area of risk where something might be recorded incorrectly? And so that's just the payroll example, but same for disbursements. We'll look to say, who's approving this? Are they an authorized approver? Was it within the budget? Is the invoice look like it's from like a real vendor? And then we also walk through, the bid process. If we select bids, to make sure that those have followed all of your policies and procedures in place. And particularly when it comes to the federal dollars, we really scrutinize those because we do provide an opinion on compliance for those. And so we select it's what we call a statistical sample of payroll and disbursements, just to make sure that all of your policies are being met, in addition to the federal policies as well. So if you want to schedule a phone call, we could go through all of them if you want. I could keep talking forever because I find it thrilling, but I'm not sure everybody in the room does. Did they answer your question?
It does
or no?
answer my question.
Okay.
I think that I could probably address some of those with Ms. Grahowski.
McLaughlin.
Ms. McLaughlin, I'm sorry. Sorry, my mind. Sorry. My Teresa's mixed up. I'm sorry, Ms.
That's all
McLaughlin. Later at another point, I appreciate it. Thank
Yep.
you.
And you had a
Yeah,
question?
I had a question about our 5% balance. Do you have any recommendations, or do you make any recommendations on the 5% balance, or is that just strictly the finance office for 5% balance?
So
the state for the?
Well, the 5% fund balance is what the state considers kind of a minimum of what you want to be, because if you dip below that, you're all too familiar with being considered, you're scrutinized a little bit more and considered an early warning district. So 5% is kind of a minimum. It's really up to the board as to what you want to do and kind of what your future plans are as to how hefty of a fund balance you want to carry. You also have, it's kind of one of those things, you also have unions where they don't want to see that too high either. So it's kind of a balance, but I would say you definitely don't want to dip any lower than the 5% because that puts you into that early warning district phase.
Okay, that just caught my attention because you mentioned you made some recommendations based on restricted and unrestricted. I think that was title funds or?
Oh, sorry. So when you're looking at expenditures, there are certain criteria. So for example, capital projects funds. If you have an expenditure that comes up and it really could be something that could be used, maybe the board has determined that you want to take on a project next year, and so you're going to assign some fund balance for a capital project. And then the next year you have an expenditure that comes up, and it could fall under what you've assigned to spend, or it could fall under the unassigned. And so your policy would then state that you're going to use those assigned dollars first before tackling those unassigned, so you don't dip into that. So as far as the restricted, it just depends on the nature of what is coming in, but your policy then would indicate that if an expenditure meets the criteria of one of those assigned or restricted or committed balances versus unrestricted, which order would you spend those funds in?
Okay,
Hopefully that helps a little
Yes,
bit.
it does.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you. Mr. Cooper?
Thank you. As it relates to that internal control, there's specifically to that policy around fund balancing, are you at liberty, and I'm not saying now, but to recommend a benchmark in terms of who may have a good policy for us to maybe start
Sure.
with?
Yeah, I can provide some example policies. I think actually MDE may have a sample policy out there as well, too. It may leave that percentage blank, but I can, take a look at some of your peers that do have fund balance to see what kind of percentages they may be using. There's no requirement that you set a percentage when you're taking a look at that. It's up to you as to what you want to set that percentage at, if you want to. When we're looking at our audit procedures, when we're looking at compliance with policies, we look to see, is that percentage in there, and then have you met that? And so it's really up to you. If you could not put a percentage in if you wanted to, because that always leaves the possibility that you might be in violation of your policy if you dip below that as well, too. So it's kind of your decision as to if you want to put a percentage in or not.
Madam President, we do have a policy that sets the target for our fund balance, but I think you were asking about maybe a sample policy for the use of the restricted and the unrestricted dollars?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Oh,
That might be something
Perfect.
different.
Yes,
Yeah, I
we
think
can
that's
provide
what we
that.
were asking about.
Yep.
We do have a fund balance policy.
Is that good? Okay. Mr. Craig?
You said that we'll be, in the next audit, we'll be reporting OPEB. For the benefit of those who don't know, OPEB stands for Other Post-Employment Benefits. What other post-employment benefits do we have as a school district? Because
That MIPSR's plan includes a healthcare component as
right,
well.
but that's all run through the state, isn't it? And that's all incorporated into the MIPSR's. So
Yes.
do we have
It's still our liability.
Oh, I understand, but do we have a different?
I'm sorry?
Is there something different
No.
than that? Okay, so it'll be the same thing, just reported a
Yeah.
different way. Okay.
As an auditor, we're
Scared me.
calling it GASB 68, which made us incorporate that pension. We're calling it GASB 68 Round 2, because it's going to look just like we did for pension, but it's going to be those healthcare benefits that get reported.
Right, and it just talks about identifying it, not necessarily planning and funding it, but just
Correct.
identifying it. 'Cause
Correct.
that's the concern when you see that big number of, oh, we have this $70 million of unfunded liability standing out there. That's.
And it's one of those things you
It's
can't
something
do
you have to
anything
identify,
about.
but not necessarily start funding.
Correct. In fact, you don't have the possibility to pre-fund it or to try and fund it, because the plan that you're in, it's a multi-employer plan, so all the school districts in the state are part of that plan. And so the proportion of your liability is based on what your payroll was the year before, or what your contributions were into that plan the year before. So for example, Buena Vista School District in Inkster, they actually had a percentage of that liability because the year that they ceased operations was the year that this went into place, and then the next year it went away because they didn't have any contributions going into it. So the proportion of the liability is based on those required contributions into the plan. So you can't really pre-fund because it's not like you have your own separate pot of that. It's just reallocated every year based on contributions.
And that's just a different identifier of what we already kind of know.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
That-
Yep.
all right. That's-
Yep.
I feel much better. Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Friedman?
So in the financial statements, most of the financial statements are on a fund basis. The first 2 pages of the basic financial statement is a statement of net position and a statement of activities. That's taking our modified accrual fund statements and making them full accrual. So we record all our fixed assets, the accumulated depreciation, all our long-term debt, and on that statement of net position, that's where that $70 million liability is reported. And it's just for reporting, it's not recorded on our books,
Right, and it's a mixture of pension and healthcare.
just pension.
And, it's just pension.
And then next year will be healthcare
Next year
as
will
well.
be healthcare,
Yeah.
right?
Yep, correct.
Mr. Freitas?
When does the state determine the MIPSR rate? The stock market's been doing really well the past year, and I wonder if the fund balance for the state pension is doing much better, that they would be able to lower the rate and take some of the burden off the school districts.
That's a great question. The rate is from October 1st through September 30th, but I don't know how far in advance they set that rate. And I do know that also as part of like this recording, they're trying to smooth out some of those incomes and losses, and so there's some deferred outflows and inflows that they then amortize over the life of the people that are in the plan, as well as they say 5 years for like asset changes. So I don't know the components as to how that's built into those rates, but at the same time, when you look at, your liability alone is 70 million just for the pension, I don't envision that they're going to decrease that rate anytime soon because they're still trying to fund, some of those liabilities that are out there too. But I don't know the exact answer.
But the whole state pension program is doing really well with the stock market. So that would be lowering the burden for all the school districts, and we could capitalize on some of that savings.
Perhaps, I forget what the actual, it's like 29 billion or 23 billion of a net pension liability though, so it has to do really good for a long enough time, to try and balance that out. But I don't know as far, I can't imagine that they're gonna reduce it too much, but I'm not privy to how they come up with that calculation. But you would think that ideally, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the rates that were effective October 1st of this year actually came out in late spring. So when I presented the original budget, I had an idea of not knowing exactly the UAL portion and the effective rate for the district, but at least the base pension rate, which was on that chart, which was at 25.96%.
Something like that, yeah.
Percent. So we do have, it does come out in late spring.
So we'd have to wait till late spring to see what it will be for the
Yes.
following year. Okay.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Like I said, we appreciate being selected to do your audit, and we appreciate working with your staff and their hard work as well.
Thank you, too. Okay, moving on to the next presentation, we have the HR report from Mr. Moran.
All right, well, I'd like to start off with some really good news. Staffing, when I first took this job last year, we had 18 people from the district on layoff. All of those were teachers. Currently, we have 8 people on layoff, 4 of them teachers and 4 of them special ed parapros. And 2 of those, 1 from each unit, were voluntary layoffs. The PMP program, after ending the PMP program last year, we were able to continue employment for all but 2 of those teachers in that program. One of them, we were restricted in what positions we could offer her by her teaching endorsements, but she's currently teaching in Las Vegas right now. The other one, we did offer a position to, but she wasn't interested in the position we offered. She took a voluntary layoff, and we were able to offer that same position to the next person down on the recall list. One of the things the HR department has been working on, we've been working closely with the Asher administration. trying to bring their staffing in line with their student enrollment. In recent years, Asher's seen a dramatic change in their student enrollment, but very little in the way of changes to their staffing. Our initial changes to the staffing over there were pretty dramatic to bring those in line, but now that we've made those decisions and made those changes, there still will be changes necessary in the future, but they should be much more minor. One of the challenges I've found in this position is that it's becoming increasingly hard to find special ed certified teachers in our market, especially substitutes. If someone's got a special ed endorsement, they're not going to sub for very long before someone picks them up and hires them because of that special ed endorsement. We always seem to have at least one long-term vacancy in a special ed position in this district, it's generally for a leave of absence. And the difficulty with that is special ed services students that have IEPs, individual education plans. In those individual education plans, there is a legal requirement that's usually listed of how many service hours they get. And those hours don't count unless they're provided by a teacher with a special ed endorsement, and we're legally required to meet those minimum requirements. That's why it's so important to have a sub in a special ed position that has the right credentials. In order to try to fight this problem, we created a special ed premier substitute program. Much like our special ed or like our general ed premier substitutes, we wanted to bring in a special ed premier substitute that we could move to fill these positions. We offered a much higher pay for someone that has this endorsement. We're offered $165 a day. By comparison, our general ed premier subs get $125 a day. Our long-term substitutes get $100 per day. Our certified daily rate is $80, and our non-certified daily rate is $75 a day. Now, our daily subs, that's the certified and non-certified, also get a $60 or $20 bonus for working on a Friday. But I'll go over that in just a moment in more detail. But again, the liability of being found out of compliance with those legal requirements warrants the extra pay for this. And even with that extra pay, we're struggling to keep that position filled. The people that have those endorsements tend to get hired up rather quickly. And our last, the special ed premier sub that we started this year with, was just hired by us to fill a vacancy, a permanent vacancy. Another trend that I've noticed is that we're getting fewer and fewer applicants fresh out of college. The majority of the applicants we're getting are experienced teachers. Many of them already have their master's degrees, and a lot of them are currently working somewhere else in a teaching position. A lot of them are charter school teachers, but not all of them. I think it's a compliment to Southgate schools that we've got so many teachers that are working in other schools and other districts that are interested in coming here to work for us. I definitely think this is a trend that we need to continue and encourage. I think as we approach a teacher shortage, the reputation we have for how we treat our teachers is gonna be either a blessing or a hindrance when it comes to recruiting high quality people. I do want to point out that I've asked one of those teachers coming from another district why they came to Southgate. The response I got was, Southgate teachers just seem happier than most. Some other things I want to point out is that we've had multiple teachers that we've recalled from layoff that had found teaching jobs in other districts that had been there long enough to have as much or sometimes more seniority in their new district than they have in Southgate, but they were still eager to come back. And already this year, we've had 3 people that we've hired that took pay cuts to come work for us. Now, audits, because I know you didn't get enough audit talk. We have audits in the HR department, a little bit different. The one audit we've had since I've been here is an audit by the Michigan State Police auditing our handling of criminal history record information. We successfully addressed all findings, and the auditor, who was responsible for the entire downriver area, commented that we had the fewest findings of any district that she'd audited downriver. Now, full disclosure, she hadn't finished all of her audits yet. She still had a few to go, but I was happy to hear something like that. And most of the findings that she found had already been fixed. She just had to cite them as a matter of protocol. Some of the issues that we've been researching and addressing are staff attendance and sub-coverage. This seems to be an ongoing problem. If you ask anyone in the district, they'll tell you Fridays are the worst. It's always seems to be a lot less coverage for Friday absences. The tendency is to blame the teachers and say, well, they're taking Fridays off. But when we go in and look at the actual numbers, that's not really what's happening. The teacher absentee rate is slightly higher for Fridays, but not that much. What makes it feel like it's a bigger problem is that we're finding the subs don't want to work on Fridays. They want their long weekends. So that's why it makes Fridays seem like it's a problem. When we were looking at the fill rate issues, some of the options we looked at were, what if we paid more for our sub rates? We looked at a comparison of other districts through EduStaff. There are districts out there that pay more than us that don't have the same fill rate we have. Their fill rate is lower. There's districts out there that pay less than us that have a higher fill rate. You know, they took this information to an ad staff and showed it to the administrators and says, hey, be nice to your subs because that seems to make a bigger difference than how much we're paying them. We looked at the possibility of hiring another premier sub, but when we looked at the numbers, that person wouldn't get utilized the entire week, would be used mainly on Fridays. So rather than pay someone that we wouldn't use on a Friday, we looked into other options. Since Fridays seemed to be the problem, our solution was to raise the pay rate for Fridays. That's why I mentioned before that $20 bonus for working on Fridays. Instead of throwing money at the whole week, let's throw it at the one day of the week that's a problem. Now, this is all based on last year's numbers. This year's numbers are coming in. We've been watching this year's numbers. The average fill rate right now is the same as last year for the entire year, which is good. The problem is that the fill rate for this time of year compared to last year is much lower. Last year's fill rate this time of year was higher, and the average got pulled down by the spring months when the fill rate was lower. This is an area for concern. It's something we're going to keep an eye on, and my recommendation is going to be moving forward that we do actually look at another premier sub, because if the trend follows the same, our fill rate will end up being much lower this year. We've looked into the options of hiring an athletic trainer. We looked at hiring independently. We looked at Henry Ford Healthcare System, and we looked at Beaumont Healthcare System. Of those three, the option we decided to go with was Beaumont. Beaumont was more optimistic about getting someone in the position quicker. They were affiliated with more physicians in this area, and they were more willing to adapt their pricing to match our budget. HR department has taken over the Safe Schools tutorials. We've gone through and we've been able to find that we're allowed to give refresher tutorials to people that have taken the full tutorials previously. And even with the inclusion of the new state-required seclusion and restraint module, we were able to shorten the actual amount of time that teachers spend taking those tutorials. Negotiations. We've got 8 union contracts expiring at the end of the school year. We began actively negotiating with the largest of those unions last year. The negotiations have gone well. We've got very good relations between the union and the district. There's been a positive spirit of cooperation going forward and trying to fix a lot of the vague language. Anytime you have vague language in a contract, you're inviting conflict. So we're trying to clear up, without really changing the meaning of the language, we're making it more clear so that nobody can argue it one way or the other. We're also looking at updating a lot of outdated language in the contract. A lot of that is outdated because of laws have changed, things that have changed that aren't allowed to be in contracts. But there's a lot of stuff that's just old. You know, busing duty is in the contract. There's rules about not calling outside the 734 area exchange without an administrator's permission. There's language in there guaranteeing the use of a Scantron machine. So there's a lot of outdated language in there that really needed to be taken out, and the union has worked very well with us in going through and cleaning that up so far. We haven't begun the difficult part of negotiations is when you start talking about compensation and benefits. Mrs. McLaughlin has got a meeting scheduled for October 30th in which each unit has been invited to send a representative where she's going to talk about the financial status of the district. We've refused to talk about any proposals that would have a significant impact on the budget, like insurance or compensation, until everyone is fully aware of what the financial status of the district is. After that October 30th meeting is when we'll we'll open up to talk about things like that. And, whoops. Last thing is I want to just share share some numbers with you. And I believe you've got those numbers on the board included packet, just talking about some of the things that have happened since the beginning of the school year. You have any questions for me?
Any questions? I have a couple questions. The first one is with substitutes. Do we pay, is the pay rate, does it fluctuate over the years, or does it stay the same, or do we go based on average in the area? How does that work with the subs?
We're about average for the area. We don't have access to, there's two main substitute companies, PESG and EduStaff. We don't really have access to the PESG numbers, but EduStaff will share their rates with us. They won't share the names of the districts, but they'll tell us District A pays this much, and this is their fill rate. District B pays this much, and this is their fill rate. And we're about middle of the road.
Okay. And do you know if our rate has changed, let's say in the last 5 years or 10 years?
It's been the same since I've been here, so that's 4.5 years.
Okay. And then with the refresher tutorials that you have for personnel, is there a requirement by the state that it's the full module or tutorial that they have to review, or is it just?
They have
is it
to have
okay
the
for
full, if
refresher?
they've never had it before, they have to have the full module. But if they've taken the full module before, and most of us in education have seen those modules every year for 20, 30 years, if they've seen it before, we're allowed to give them the refresher tutorial,
Okay.
which saves a lot of time.
Thank you. Mr. Coopser?
Thank you, Madam President. As it relates to the benchmarking related to regional substitute pay, hasn't changed in 4.5 years. How often is that benchmarked and updated as necessary? I mean, how often do you look at it, and it sounds like you haven't made a change, and it's based
No,
on a full rate?
the last time I looked at it was in January.
Okay.
But, I was hired the previous June, so that was also the first time I looked at it. I would expect again sometime this year to look at it again. I would want to look at it annually.
I'd like to add to that because I was involved in that too. We looked at it just to kind of have an idea where we were, but we also looked at it in relationship to fill rates. And what we're discovering is that how much you offer to pay a sub does not seem to have much, if any, effect on your fill rate. It has much more to do with how substitutes are treated in a particular district where people are willing to work and proximity to where they live. There are a lot of those factors. So prior to Mr. Moran being hired, we had looked at that annually to consider where are we in relationship to other people, where are we in terms of our fill rates. But some of the changes that are new, the whole notion of a premier sub, that's something that is relatively new. We weren't doing that 4 and 5 years ago. We have raised some of our rates for the more long-term specialty positions as we felt we needed to.
The variance downriver seems to be right around $5 to $15, not much more than that. There's no districts out there that are paying a lot less than us, and no districts that are really out there paying a lot more.
Then, if I could have a follow-up for Ms. Cretion as it relates to a countermeasure related to the treatment to increase fill rates for the treatment of subs within our district. Has anything been done with that?
Absolutely. One of the things that I've sent out several reminders to administrators, just things to think about when a sub comes in. How are they greeted? How do you show them where to go? But one of the things that we did as an administrative team this year is we felt like we needed some consistency in the materials that are available to subs. So every building was required to develop a sub folder, and there are some common items that have to be in there, because one of the things that's difficult for a sub is you walk in the door, you want somebody to have told you where to park and what door to use, and you want to be greeted when you come in, and you certainly want somebody to hand you the information that you're going to need to have a good day. And if you sub in more than one building, you want those sorts of things to be similar from one building to another, so that you don't always feel like you're on a new island and trying to figure it out as you go. So those are just some of the things that as an administrative team we've talked about for our subs.
Do we know if they've been effective?
I don't know that anything has been hugely effective in terms of the big picture of fill rates. When I was at the MESA conference in September, this was the hot topic discussion. Michigan State University, there's a team that was actually hired to start delving into this whole issue of substitute shortages, and they had a lot of data and a lot of information that they presented. They were just about booed off the stage because there were hundreds and hundreds of superintendents that their response was, we really don't want you to present the data to us. We want some relief from the legislature in terms of who is allowed to sub. I will say that the legislature has tied our hands, if not crippled, the public education system in terms of not allowing our greatest pool of people who should be subbing and would like to sub are our retired teachers. And our legislature has made that nearly impossible for them to do that. And that all by itself has more to do with the sub shortages than anything else. And we shout that to the rooftops. It's back again being considered in the critical shortage list, and they're talking one more time about providing some relief. But they are just so convinced that teachers are double dipping and somehow going to derail this really sound retirement system that we have, that they just have not budged much on that in a long time.
Within the legislative, mandates, the Michigan Department of Education have given us as much wiggle room as they can get away with giving on substitute qualifications. The law states that a substitute has to have 60 college credit hours. The previous permit from the state of Michigan required that they have 60 college credit hours from the same university in the same program. They recently changed that law, saying that you can have, as long as you have 60 total, you can have 20 here, and 20 somewhere else, which opens up the pool a little bit. They've done what they can. They actually nixed some changes they were planning for the long-term sub. They were going to change the current language, which was 90 calendar days that a sub is allowed to fill the same position. They were going to change that to 45 working days. I was with the group of HR directors that protested that and pointed out that an FMLA leave is 60 working days, and that they should at least be 60 working days so we can get one person into sub for a teacher that's out on an FMLA. And they changed their minds and nixed the change and left it as it is at 90 calendar days. So,
Mr. Craig?
How much of the, I guess this is I don't know if it's a question or a statement. I guess I'll pose it as a question. How much of that treatment do you not have control over, and is the kids that treat them badly, that they don't want to come back? And I'm not saying it's us. I'm saying in school-wide, is that?
I can assure you
is
that we have not collected any data on that. We have a small pool of incredibly loyal subs. We have subs that work in this district all the time. So I have to believe that our students are treating them pretty well.
So the kids are going to reach some kind of a rapport with those, but.
And every teacher in our system can go in and put their preferred list, which means that those people get the first calls. Like I said, we've done a lot with Premier subs. There just isn't a large pool out there. There was a time when you really didn't have trouble hiring subs, and again, like I said, many of your subs were retired teachers from your own district who are phenomenal. They know your system. The kids know them. That they're a real asset. But even a retired sub from another district, if you've taught for 20, 25, 30, 35 years, you are just going to be really well prepared to come into someone else's classroom with, maybe they've been sick that morning, and although you have sub plans, they're not always the most, they're not as defined as if I can plan that ahead. I mean, anybody I've subbed, so I remember those days. But no, I really would argue that we're having trouble at any level in the state of Michigan finding subs because of kids' behavior. It's just the pay is not great right now. You have to have all of these requirements, and the people who really most want to sub can't sub. And that's really it's a very sad situation for all the schools in Michigan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, Mr. Moore? Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on to committee reports. Anti-bullying, there is no report at this time, but I would like to request that the committee meet, instead of November 2nd, meet on November 10th at 4:30, because there's a conflict with the Wayne County Association of School Boards. So we'll tentatively have that for November 10th as our next meeting. Second, finance?
We haven't had a meeting since the last board meeting, and we don't have one scheduled. I think I'd like to try and get one scheduled once before the end of the year, of the calendar year, because of the holidays that are coming up, and normally they're scheduled the fourth week of the month, which is going to run into Thanksgiving and along with Christmas time frames. So I'm thinking sometime in mid to early November would probably be our next board meeting, and I'll send it around to the committee and try and hammer out a date that works for everyone.
Okay, thank you. Legislative, we haven't had or heard anything for the past 2 months, so we're going to have to review if that's a viable committee at this point. We'll talk about that at another time, but curriculum, I'm sorry, policy number 3, there isn't anything to report, and I'll give an updated date in the next meeting.
Madam President, I think there was a date that was sent out, and I just want to urge a sense of we need to make sure that we can meet in November because we do have Neola policies to review.
Okay, thank you for the reminder, because the second we have a meeting in Wayne County at RESA, so we just pushed the anti-bullying back to the 10th, so we can move that to the 10th if it's open for you.
I will check. November 10th?
Yeah,
Okay.
at 5:30 then, that would be.
I'll check. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, so then moving on to curriculum. The committee met October 19th and discussed the approved and updated curriculum adopted forms. The curriculum director provided us with an update on the upcoming curriculum review of the ELA in science for Davidson Middle School. And we also discussed the components of the wellness policy that we have regarding nutrition to be integrated throughout the curriculum in the district. We had a wellness committee meeting with Mr. Connors, and part of that was reviewing the policy for the wellness policy for Southgate, and nutrition within the throughout the curriculum was part of that. So I wanted to see if we can take a look and see how we can integrate that in our curriculum. So that's just in the initial stages of the discussion. Our next meeting is November 16th at 4:30. Personnel?
Much of what we discussed in the Personnel Committee last night, Jerry had presented in his presentation today. So the one thing that is outlined, and I think everybody has a form here, is the interim superintendent pay considerations, recommendation of the average between the difference of if should we pay monthly possibly for the interim position for Ms. Pastor or daily, and there's a recommendation from the policy. I'm sure we can discuss with permanent policies in the work session that we meet a little higher than in the middle for doing double duty. I think with Jerry, had suggested $80 a day, and to pay it daily would be easier move in case we, take the interim title off, if that's which is a possibility. That's really the only difference in the Personnel Committee. The only difference from what Jerry had talked about, Mr. Moore earlier in his presentation. So that I'm sure is going to be readdressed in the work items goal. In our next meeting, I think we're gonna hold off with the three of us because there's differing schedules lately. So we'll get together with Mr. Estheimer, Dr. Pomponio, and the powers to be, and we will set up for a date forthcoming.
Thank you. Grounds and maintenance, we don't have anything to report at this time, but the next meeting will be November 14th at 6 p.m. If it's good with you, schedule for the second week in November, which is before the next board meeting. Okay, moving on to discussion. Finance report, Mrs. McLaughlin.
I have nothing additional to report tonight, but I just wanted to inform the board that at our first meeting in November, Plant Moran will be here to give a short presentation regarding our transportation RFP and to discuss different aspects that the board would like to discuss regarding that.
Okay, thank you. So if we have any questions, we get
Yes.
them ready ahead of time. Thank you. Okay, the curriculum report, Mrs. Pastor.
So the third grade reading legislation update, we have completed all the initial and extensive assessments for our K-2 students. The reading specialists are completing the IRIPs, or the individualized reading improvement plans. That requires a meeting with parents, and they will be meeting with those first grade students who need additional support in the next few weeks. As a grant update, we did receive $43,470 for 35A grant, which is called the Additional Time Grant at the state level. This is funding that is provided to help the K-3 grade students reach literacy or reading development. It's about $66 per pupil for our K-3 students. We also received a 3-year grant from Kids Read Now. This represents about $9,500 over 3 years, and this is specifically for Ford Lines K-3 students who are the highest socioeconomic status in the district and who score the lowest on our MSTEP reading and literacy. Students will get to choose 9 books for summer reading. The students will leave with 3 books, and once the parents email, call, or text that they have completed the books, a new one is mailed approximately 1 time a week. If the company doesn't hear from the parents, they do reach out about once a week to remind them to read and to respond. Each student receives a minimum of 4 books, and each book has 4 questions designed to help students make connections. So not what color was Johnny's shirt, but things like text-to-text questions, text-to-self, text-to-world, and creative or critical thinking questions. So that'll begin in the summer of 2018 for the Ford Line students. Our current grant allocations, just to give you some idea, 31A is about $1.4 million. The Title I allocation for this year is $628,000. Title II is $130,000 plus a few dollars. Title IV, we did get $10,000. Our total state and federal right now with those is $2.1 million. So we do have a significant amount of money to really focus some attention on our at-risk learners. So.
Okay, any questions for Mrs. Pastor? Thank you, Jill. Superintendent's report, Mrs. Grecian?
I don't have anything specific from my office, but I did want to note that Plant Moran was not able to attend a meeting this month, and so Rob Kokoski sent just a couple of updates for you. Clark Construction is continuing to wrap up punch list items. The FRP doors and frames continue to arrive from the supplier. Those are mostly our exterior doors. They're working second shift and weekends to complete the replacement, targeting early November for completion. We are getting there with the doors. And on a really nice note, students, I was in several buildings today, and students actually commented on how nice the new doors looked. I was amazed that they noticed and commented on those. The auditorium lighting RFP is being developed. That does also include some sound component, and the curtains are being included in that, even though there's a different funding source for those. I know Ms. McLaughlin has been working hard to get that posted on a very challenging new site. We're still targeting November 28th to bring a bid packet to you for approval for the auditorium items. The 2018 roofing replacement at Anderson, that's the last big chunk of the bond money being finalized and issued. Has that been issued?
The RFP for the Anderson High School roofing and the auditorium work were posted this week. They had to be posted by today in order to meet the 2-week minimum for the bids to be received on November 7th. So
Oh.
it's in process.
Okay, good. That was the target date, and still looking to bring the Anderson roofing bid on either November 28th or December 12th. So, you know, if we meet all the targets, the last two big pieces, the bid packs will come to the board before the end of the calendar year, which would be nice because we'd have pricing secured and, you know, the scope of work would be secured, and then that leaves relatively smaller projects for next year.
Okay. Any questions for Mrs. Creation? Okay, thank you. Board President update. I have a couple. The Wayne County Association of School Boards is holding a general meeting on November 2nd, and there's a Dr. Paul Sala who's facilitating a conversation regarding roles and responsibilities in relation to ensuring that zero tolerance changes with the recent zero tolerance laws, suspension and expulsion trends, and ways Wayne Risa can support the district. It's at 6:30. And the Michigan Association of School Board is hosting their annual Leadership Fall Conference, November 9th through the 12th. And they do have a delegate assembly, which we usually appoint 2 delegates, but I don't think 2 are going to be able to make it on that Thursday. Are you attending at all?
I will be up north.
Okay, thank you. And that's all I have for the update. So, moving on to citizen comments. Are there any citizen comments? Moving on to consent. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I move that we approve the consent agenda, which consists of the October 10th, 2017 regular board meeting minutes and the HR update.
I'll second.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Craig and a support by Mr. Estheimer. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Moving on to action, we have one action item.
Madam President, I'd like to make a motion.
Gotta let it get presented.
I'll present it here. So the action item.
Wait.
No.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Madam President,
Slow down.
before you make the motion, if I could make a comment. The form that I received was sent from Shelters, but in fact, this is Shelters and Ford Line, and I have the Ford Line one now in my possession. If you would be so kind as to change the motion to include Shelters and Ford Line, then we can take care of both of these tonight.
Thank you. I'll make that motion. So this is a motion for a request for an out-of-state field trip from Shelters and Ford Line. So the motion I will make is to approve Shelters Elementary and Ford Line Elementary request for an out-of-state field trip in May for 5th grade safety patrol members.
Support.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Estheimer and a support by Mr. Craig. Is there any further discussion? Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay, moving on to employee representatives. Are there any employee representatives? Okay, going on to information and announcements from the board. Any? Mr. Estheimer.
Hi, yes, since we're talking about Shelters, I'd like to continue the discussion. Shelters students started a kindness club. The Shelters Kindness Club is in its infancy stage. It's a student-driven 5th grade club. The purpose is for 5th graders to promote and model kindness throughout the building and beyond. While the overall goal was research from the Teacher Tolerance Fall 2017 publication, a study by Deborah Ginsburg reported that simple acts of kindness make happier people. But the truest acts of kindness are secret and not done for notoriety, but for happiness that comes from within. Ms. Guttner is the club staff sponsor and is working towards all members finding happiness and true acts of kindness, and is over the moon with the 5th grade excitement. In fact, I was contacted by at least 3 students regarding this, and they're extremely excited about it. The club had their first official appearance at the Friday's Boo Bash at Shelters. The Kindness Club passed out free glow bracelets that night to all the students and children, telling everyone that wore a bracelet, kindness brightens everyone's world. The club is also selling kindness bracelets for $1, and there was no profit to be made by that, just enough to pay for the bracelet production and orders. This bracelet is more of a permanent way to show a united, kind front at shelters, whereas the glow bracelets were just for that day. The Kindness Club hopes to do many non-monetary things in the future to spread happiness and joy within shelters in the community. I was able to purchase some of these bracelets, and I tried to get some for you all, but they're sold out in the adult sizes, so that's a good thing. We're going to bring some tonight and pass out, but they are all out. But they do still have children's sizes available. If anybody would like some, I'd be happy to contact the PTO or the Kindness Club and get them for you. Also, at shelters, as I mentioned, they had their Boo Bash last Friday and had over 600 people in attendance. If you look on their the PTO website, the PTO Facebook page, you'll be able to see some of the great pictures. It was a huge success. I didn't get the results back from Fordline, but they also had on the same night their Halloween party. And along with Fordline and shelters, the other two elementary schools that we have, Councilman Roush and Councilman Roulette made donations to each elementary school's Halloween parties from Sweet Arrangements and Wyandotte. They supplied items for the sweet tables for each of the elementary schools. So Councilman Roush is in attendance, and I just wanted to say thank you for your help with the schools on behalf of the PTO groups. That was very generous that you helped them out. And lastly, I wanted to just wish everybody a safe and happy Halloween. Enjoy the half day.
It's not a half day for staff. It's, let you know.
Madam President?
Mr. Green?
It's a half day for this staff at a different school.
We're going to talk about subs again?
I have a couple of announcements. One on a serious note, and this has bothered me all day for the viewing audience because I know there's not too many people in the sitting audience. I can appreciate, and I would like everybody to understand this, I can appreciate the caring and the concern that parents have for our schools and our children, and nothing is perfect. And we understand the problems as a board, as administration, as teachers, to try to make their schools safe for everyone. But I was called today on a parents page, and again, I'm all for the parents page, hopefully being positive, but please understand there is a process. Some of the information on the parent page today was inaccurate, and it really caused a disturbance with some people that probably caused some panic with some parents, and other parents stepped in and clarified some of the problems. The teachers, the administrations, and this school board does care about your children. That's why every single one of us are up here. And if you have a problem, please call your administrator first. And then if you do not get anywhere with the administration, please call the superintendent. And if you do not call the superintendent, you can call any one of us on the board in a process, and we'll try to check into it. We're not dismissing things. One of the comments was that this board and this administration won't do anything about problems. And that really bothered me, and I think it would bother my colleagues if they have not seen it, is that there is a process, and we do care about your children, and we do follow the process, and we are doing the best that we can once we find out the information to check into this information or the concerns. But please make sure it's accurate as much as possible, and please go through the proper channels so we can do our best as a board to help the administration and our superintendent into making Southgate schools the best place they can be. On a second note, for Grogan is in the middle of their book fair. Believe me, it put me out $60 because of that little one over there today, which I'm very happy to say that she's an avid reader, and they do a great job like all of our elementary schools. And it will culminate with the Oktoberfest on Friday. Any Grogan parents that are watching, I'm sure the Grogan PTO would love to have some more support, and not so much support, I'm sure you support them, but help. We can always use the help, because I'm the one with some other people ends up carrying everything, and I'm kind of lazy sometimes. So, no, in all honesty, it's a great event, and the Grogan PTO and the Grogan teachers who help out do a wonderful job. And I would say, except for the fact that I was looking forward to Mr. Shively coming up and speaking, that it's been, that's it for me.
And just to kind of let you know, too, we can send an email to, or I'll send an email to the Junior Honor Society. They need 5 hours of community service, so that might be something they might want to do.
Thank you.
Any other information or announcements? Okay, I have a couple. At Davidson, it's Spirit Week, and they're having their Halloween dance tomorrow at 6 p.m., October 25th. And also to add on to what Mr. Green mentioned, Mr. Roush and Sweet Arrangements in Wyandotte has generously donated popcorn to this dance tomorrow. So that was very nice of them. Thank you very much. And also, I wanted to mention the Southgate Parks and Rec Department. They have a proposal out on the ballot for November 7th, and I wanted to say that I've looked around the areas in different cities and seen that they have improvements over the past couple of years for their parks and their community, and I think that this is a great way to invest back into the community. I looked at some of the materials or master plan and the information that they provided, and it was just a great initiative, so hopefully the community supports that. And that's all I have. Moving on to work session. The first one we have is appointment of permanent superintendent. Mrs. Creation.
So I think it's important as we get closer to my departure from the district, I had asked the board at the last meeting to affirm the appointment of Mrs. Pastor as interim superintendent, and I think now we need to address the conversation about a permanent superintendent. I think that tonight might be a good time for the board to start that conversation. Surely there are a lot of choices in terms of how the board might proceed toward a permanent replacement for myself. Obviously, one choice is to post the job externally. With an external posting, you could consider doing it in-house or using any number of organizations that assist, and Mr. Moran has some information that he shared with the HR committee, and I'm going to ask him to share some information with all of you in just a minute. Or another choice, which is my firm recommendation, that the board consider Ms. Pastor as my permanent replacement. I think that there are times when looking outside of an organization is the best thing to do. It's healthy. It's good for an organization to have some new blood. I think there are times when it is in the best interest of an organization to look internally. And at this point in time, and I have certainly in my past, recommended looking outside. That I don't think that that's the best thing for the district right now. It has been a challenging few years. The district is stable, but still somewhat fragile. I am well aware of the fact that there were some broken trust when I returned to the district, and I think that it made a huge difference that people knew me. I think it made a huge difference that I knew the district. It made a huge difference that I was familiar with the state of Michigan. I was familiar with Southgate. I knew the personnel. I sort of knew the financial situation when I came, although there was a bit of a surprise after I agreed to assume this position, and it was a little bit more challenging than I had thought. The staff had been asked to take a lot of concessions, and we had gone through reconfiguration, and people had changed buildings, and families had been afraid and had left. I don't want to belabor the situation that I found the district in when I returned, but I do think that I was able to hit the ground running because I was kind of an internal person. And I think that for all of those very same reasons, I think it would be in the best interest of the district to consider an internal person. Jill is highly respected in the district. She is well-known. She is familiar. She is knowledgeable. She has worked at a lot of different levels. She has been an integral part of everything that I have done over the last 3.5 years. She's been a part of the strategic planning and the 5-year planning and all of the things that we do. I am also going to ask Mr. Moran to share some of the information that he shared with the HR committee, and then just ask that you consider tonight as being a good opportunity to start the conversation about what might be the next steps in terms of a permanent replacement for myself. My recommendation being that you quickly come to the conclusion that Jill Pastor should be the next superintendent of the district. So maybe, Mr. Moran, if you have some other comments to share.
Well, I am going to, start off by saying that I do have strong feelings about this. I do agree with Mrs. Cretion, but a couple of things I want to point out that I pointed out at the Personnel Committee. In general terms, when you're looking at an external versus an internal candidate, what you get with an internal candidate is you're going to see not much change in the direction that the district is headed and the momentum. If you like the direction the district is changing, that's a good thing. If you think the district needs to be turned around and go a different direction, you would want to look at an external candidate. Personally, I like the direction the district's going. I think we've got a lot of positive momentum in the right direction, and a strong internal candidate like Mrs. Pastor would continue that. I also want to say, in the effort of being thorough, the Board Personnel Committee tasked me with researching external search agencies. I took proposals and got literature from the 3 of the more prominent search agencies in the state of Michigan. As I was going through the literature and studying, seeing what services they offer, one thing came out. The first thing that jumped out at me that was common amongst all 3 is they all devote a great deal of time to working with the board to determine what are the most important personal characteristics of their next superintendent. And that's determined by the individual district. It's unique to each district based on their needs. I couldn't help as I read through this but ask myself that question about Southgate, and the first thing that came to mind was trust. The district, the teachers, the administrators, and it's even come up in previous board meetings that there's been superintendents prior to Mrs. Cretion that have abused that trust, and people are still having some difficulties trusting. And when you bring a new person in, even if you were to find someone really, really good, it would take that person years to build up the level of confidence and trust that Mrs. Pastor already enjoys. She's a known element. She's already got the respect of the staff and the administrators, and it would take a long time for someone new, even if they're really good, to build up that same level. That level of trust, from what I've seen, is what has made Mrs. Cretion so effective in her job. It's what helped her to turn the district around. It's what's helped her to bring the district out of deficit, is that the staff and the administrators had that trust and confidence in her and were willing to look at concessions. Without, if you had brought in an internal or an external candidate at that time that didn't have that same level of trust, I don't know that you'd have been able to pull that off. Again, like I said, Mrs. Pastor comes to us already with that level of confidence from the staff and that level of trust. The other thing that I want to point out is that if you go for an external candidate, the candidate pool seems to be pretty shallow right now. I don't think it's very likely that we're going to find anyone that's going to be better at the job than Mrs. Pastor, but it's possible. We might. But my question to the board is it really worth the gamble when we've already got someone good right here? So I would like to, my personal recommendation is that we appoint Mrs. Pastor as superintendent. And we've still got a lot of time before January 1st when Mrs. Cretion retires. My personal preference would be, if there's going to be movement within the district, that the board make a decision sooner rather than later, so that if we need to fill the curriculum director's position, we've got time to do that before there are any actual vacancies. And I think that's what's best for the district is continuity and not having a critical position like superintendent or curriculum director sit vacant while we try to find somebody. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Green?
Madam President, I'll start the discussion with your approval.
Sure.
I'm the one who asked Mr. Moran to check the external candidates. So I want the viewing public to know that once we, well, I'll speak for me, got hit with the Pearl Harbor bombshell that Ms. Cretion was leaving, that we have talked, not violating Open Meetings Act, but we each have talked maybe one-on-one, and I think we've all kind of bounced around what our options were. One of the options being an external candidate, and from an external candidate to see what external search engines are available. And what Mr. Moran came back to the Personnel Committee with was 3 options. Each of those options range anywhere from $4,500 to $6,000, which is another cost to the district. If we're going to find a superstar, is it worth it? Absolutely. Can we? Absolutely. But what I'm about to say, I want to be clear for me personally to start this discussion, is not something that I'm just piggybacking from Ms. Cretion or Mr. Moran. It's something that I looked and wanted to see the options, the outside candidates. I thought about the options, the pros and cons of the last couple of weeks of where we would be heading. And following along the same lines and thinking it through myself, I personally think we could, or hopefully, or possibly, if we all think we're heading in the right direction and think that Ms. Pastor is the proper choice after a discussion of not even going down this interim road or interim pay and just making a decision fairly quickly and staying the course that's been a proper course, in my opinion, with some bumps in the road. I don't agree with everything that's happened, and be able to move forward fairly quickly. So that's my opinion. Yeah. And it is, exactly, thank you, Mr. Estheimer. It is the recommendation of the Personnel Committee, as a discussion yesterday, which I was remiss earlier, that it is the recommendation as the chairperson of the Personnel Committee that we offer the job permanently to Ms. Pastor. That is our recommendation from the Personnel Committee.
I think I want to speak because I wanted to speak on behalf of my experience the past 8 years and experience working through 2 processes of going through the superintendent search and discussing with several board member colleagues throughout the state with what the results were from national searches and from localized searches through the newspaper and from searches that they've done on their own. All came back pretty much the same where the status of superintendents are in this state or even the country, where it's hard to find good superintendents, and when one superintendent is available that's superior, everybody wants them and they want to go where the highest dollar is. But so we decided the past 2 searches to do our self-search because the cost was too expensive for other agencies, outside sources. So I just, for purposes of just letting you know how I looked at it from a national and outside agency search, like Mr. Green was saying, there's a chance that we can find someone great that would do wonders for the district, but the con would be on that would be that with all the changes, transitions, strategies we have in place over the past few years even, it would take some time for that individual to get acclimated to our district. And the questions that came up for me would be, would they feel loyal to our district and our community? Would they make changes that are counterproductive to our current progress? And how would it make our staff feel with another new outsider trying to step in? And for the internal candidate appointment, the pros that I've seen, and I started to address this as an internal candidate, but then I thought about Mrs. Pastor because she's been in the district for a long time, and actually over the past several years, board members have looked towards Mrs. Pastor as a potential candidate years ago, past a couple searches. She lives in Southgate, and she's committed to the district, and the changes that we have in place. And she has experience working with various district committees, the strategies we're currently working on with our strategic plan. And she has first-hand knowledge of district direction and the needs of the district, including the curriculum and where we're going with that. And she has been to almost every single board meeting and understands what board business we're working on, just our intricate little details on our board business and how we progressed over the past few years. And she not only understands the state requirements for title funding and curriculum, but has experience as a principal in the district and with evaluations within that scope of her duties as well. And she has a good rapport with the staff, I feel, working with her. So I felt uncomfortable looking at the options for looking at outside sources, and my support would be for an internal candidate, and the internal candidate being Mrs. Pastor. Thank you. Any other?
Dr. Pomponi, Madam President, I'd just like to add one thing, because, again, I was one of the first ones who said, let's look at all our options and see where we're at. What really bothered me with what Mr. Moran came back to me was being told that he was told by these search engines that there is not a strong pool of candidates. And, my initial belief was that Ms. Pastor was the right person, personally. And then after doing research for me, it strengthened my belief. I don't think it's out of line to say that I picked up the phone and called Ms. Pastor and talked to her and asked her probably some pretty hard questions of what she was thinking, and I felt comfortable after that conversation. So all those combined, for me, was a lot of thought, where that's where I felt. And then the Personnel Committee all brought their thoughts to the table last night, and we agreed that was a recommendation that we would like to make to the whole board. Thank you.
Any other Mr. Koopser?
As I appreciate everyone, their recommendations, and unfortunately I haven't been privy to the conversations that you had with Ms. Pastor. Can I ask, do you want this job and why? I haven't really heard from you so much as I have from everyone else, as to, it's a lot of work. I see what Ms. Cretion does, and do you really want this job? I mean, I want to hear from you in terms of what this task, and are you looking forward to it? Are you hoping that there's an opportunity and aspiration for it? And
ironically, that was my first question on the phone, so.
and maybe it's a hard question. I hate to put you on the spot, but you're going to be put on the spot, so.
The answer might have changed.
That was a couple weeks ago. So I will tell you that I didn't grow up saying, boy, I want to be the superintendent when I grow up. That I always and truly still consider myself to be a teacher first, and will always think like a teacher, because I think that that's what makes successful administrators, that we think like teachers. I've been out of a classroom a long time. I think that I know that I care about this district enough to be the next superintendent. It is a little scary sitting here thinking that all of the new troubles in the district could fall onto my desk, rather than looking at grants and maybe what people might consider to be the funner things to do, because, choosing new textbooks, helping people look at curriculum, being able to tell administrators today, and Ms. Gundig didn't get to hear it, that they are getting more money in their mid-year revisions. That's all fun stuff. I'm not sure that Ms. Cretion had those opportunities to have all those fun conversations with some crises in the district. I think it would be a little bit of a learning curve. I would be honored to be the next superintendent. It is a little scary. I'm not gonna. I live in the district. I do. My two daughters graduated from this district. we are on a path of this 5-year that I do not want to derail from. I have been through several superintendents and have seen some of the damage that they can do.
Thank you.
Could I just give some perspective to that? I didn't ever want to be a superintendent. I would never have been a superintendent in any other district other than this. I cannot tell you that when you hired me, I couldn't wait to get here and do this job. But there is just a strong pull. When you've worked for this district, it just gets under your skin, and you become loyal very, very quickly. And so I'm thinking of another superintendent in the area who retired about a year ago, and at the gathering of the county superintendents said, I have been doing this for more years than me, and I have enjoyed every day. And I thought, what is wrong with me? Because I will never be able to say that I enjoyed every day. But has it been incredibly rewarding? Absolutely. Would I change anything about it? Absolutely. Well, yeah, I'd change a few things. but you don't. Jill's reaction is very similar to what mine was, and she is correct as I think about the administrators in this district, which have become a very strong team and changed in ways that I don't think they imagined they would change 3.5 years ago. And an important part of that is the best administrators, they still think like teachers. They still miss the classroom. They still want to be teachers. So I don't be afraid of considering somebody who never grew up being a superintendent, because I didn't either. And if you think I've even done an okay job, then so, maybe it's okay to not really want to do that, but to be called back into service or be called to service and to be willing to do that. I think that sometimes is the best way to match the person to the job.
Mr. Craig? Thank you, Mrs. Grisham.
I think you'll still be a teacher, just your audience is going to change, sitting in that position.
I guess as we're doing here, we're having a conversation, right? We're talking about what our options are. I think Ms. Pastor's the easy choice. That's easy. And I'm not against that. I would be against going right to the full position without the interim. I think that does her a disservice as well as us, because it gives her an opportunity to see what that job is before she commits to it, rather than just asking her to let's be maybe engaged a little bit before we get married, and then she can see if that's a fit for her. We may get to a point where she decides it's not a fit for her, and then we've jumped into a commitment. I didn't realize that had come out of policy committee. I thought we were going to talk more about what options were and what possibilities could be, because I think we owe it to the district that we do talk about those possibilities of what else could we do. Not to say that there's any better options, just to say maybe we slow down a little and talk about those options a little bit more in depth. And I would not be in favor of spending money on any kind of a search, and I guess that's not really the opposite side of what you guys are saying, but just maybe another alternative to what's being said. I would like to talk about it a little more and at least give Ms. Pastor a chance.
That's what this work session is what we're talking about.
Yeah, right, but I mean, I'd like to give Ms. Pastor a chance to maybe try that position before we make her commit to it.
And then,
Mr. Freitas?
after Jason's point, what is the next step then? If Ms. Pastor were to
Let-
come into,
Let me try to help maybe with some options, because maybe it's easier if I try to capture some of these. So if you were to go with a firm that's going to be doing a superintendent search, I can tell you that you're many, many months away.
Yeah.
And it sounds, I think the consensus is that that's really not a direction that the board wants to go. So, much like when I was hired, you can do this internally, and not internally, we do it ourselves, which means that the job is posted. If that is the decision of the board, then you need to make that decision, I believe, very quickly, because it takes a while to get a posting ready, and then you typically want to leave that posting open 2 or 3 or 4 weeks to make sure that you really capture all those people who would be interested. Then you start to set up the interviews, which can be another few weeks down the road. Then you're going to be pretty close to the holiday break. And then sometimes a Board of Education will go and visit a district for another candidate, which can be another month or 2. My concern all along has been because of the position that Jill currently holds, that doing double duty as a superintendent and the curriculum director, the way it's set up in this district, if it goes much more than, I think, about 30 days, 30 days is going to be exceedingly difficult on anyone to begin with, but then that puts the district a little bit at risk of being able to maintain the momentum and really being able to address all the things that we've set up. So if your decision is to put out an ad for superintendents to apply for, that decision really needs to be made quickly, because you would want that posted within a couple of weeks. And even at that point, your timeline is going to be a little difficult. I guess the other disadvantage to that is that it's unlikely that you will attract current superintendents mid-year. You might, but you're less likely to. You would, in all likelihood, attract local, Wayne, Tri-County area. I would think that you would have some central office administrators who would consider applying to the district. I don't know what your pool of applicants was when you hired me. One of the big differences was the deficit at that point in time, which definitely concerns people. They're a little more leery of applying for a job when a district is in deficit than not. So I guess as best I can answer that, if you were going to do that, you need to put great haste into that process, or else the district would be in a position of possibly having an interim superintendent doing double duty for several months, and that's going to be a little difficult.
My question was more like, if Jill slides over to your position, what about her position? That's what I meant, the next step. Do we want to
Okay.
have the curriculum director? Do we want to go with the assistant superintendent?
So now, when the curriculum position is vacated by contract, that's not, like the board hires the superintendent, but now you're at the next level. By contract, that would be posted internally. It could also be posted externally. I know that we have qualified internal candidates. I believe we have internal candidates who would apply for the curriculum director's spot. And then from there, it depends, on if that were an internal candidate or not. But by contract now, all of those people, we would have to do some internal postings and the decision then would be at the level of the superintendent as to whether or not you were also doing concurrent internal and external postings. So, but I do believe that that there are strong, very viable candidates internally for the curriculum director's position.
Madam President?
Mr. Koopser?
Oh, Mrs. McLaughlin, if you could possibly help me understand and answer this, as it relates to compensation related to what's contributed to retirement balances for a new superintendent, is there a limitation that would still be, the way I understand it, in terms of, let's say there was an elect for an external pool or candidate, is there currently a limitation that we could offer as it relates to their retirement compensations? If I understood that at the beginning of this.
As far as what we pay in for retirement?
Yes.
No, Normally, no, there isn't. Their wages are subject to the same percentages that all the employees in the district are subject to, that as an employer, the district has to pay.
Let me clarify, I'm sorry. As it related to increases, as it relates to the superintendent's compensation.
We are at the level of superintendent compensation where nothing would be limited.
Okay.
Yes.
But there can be a restriction by ORS if there is too large of an increase from one year to the next on a superintendent's compensation.
Does that span between one superintendent to another, is my question.
They calculate a percentage increase that can go from if the superintendent's pay increased from where the current level, there's a percentage, and I don't have the figure for the current year one. It's been a little while since I've looked at that. And if it goes up, the salary increases by more than that percentage, then that difference, that excess salary would not be retirement eligible.
That's what I was trying to get at in terms of.
But that is superintendent to superintendent. I don't believe that applies to another position to superintendent. Once you become a superintendent, then they're looking at your increase as a superintendent to whatever your next increase is.
But if you were to try and pull a superintendent from another district, you'd have those limitations, and it's
You
another
could.
consideration.
Yes.
Just something as we talk about that.
Yes.
Thank you.
You know, in the interest of giving you as much information as I can, one of the things I'd like to tell you that I learned from the talking to the search agencies, I was told that this would be a difficult time to perform a search because it's the off season. They said that normally a superintendent search takes 3 to 4 months to complete, and that's with all the background work and the reference checks and the screening, the screening process. But they said that the timeline, that the general timeline is they start the process in January and then complete the process in 3 to 4 months, with the actual start date being July 1st to match the fiscal year.
That's how long it's been, because we have 2 separate interviews, and we have the research report, and we have to post it, so it's been.
And that way, if you're hiring an existing superintendent, they're not breaking their existing contract by waiting to the end of the fiscal year to leave. One of the other things that I forgot to mention about Mrs. Pastor, if I could, is that, again, going back to that, what characteristics would be important for Southgate, beyond the trust thing, the next thing that came to mind was someone with strong financial skills. And I'd like to point out that for several years now, Mrs. Pastor has been personally responsible for multiple state and federal grants that combine to hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. So I'll just point that out too, from the finance side.
Thank you. Okay, so the consensus for tonight, or the objective for tonight, is to decide what direction we're going to go. So we need to let them know. So does the board have a consensus on doing a search or choosing internal candidate? Mr. Estheimer?
I haven't spoke to this topic, but Mr. Green spoke for me. I'm with the I'm with the Personnel Committee on this. I'm one of 3 in that committee that made that recommendation about Ms. Pastor. And we did ask Mr. Moore to stick around. We didn't get a ton of information that he can't share. He's shared most of it. But based on pretty much what you've heard today, that's where we came up with our recommendation. There wasn't, I have a packet of, the different searches and kind of but I think we're in agreement that we aren't for that anyways. But in terms of Mr. Craig speaking about interim superintendents and that period of time, I think we do sort of have that period of time anyways, a little bit right now, because we have Ms. Creasham with us until the end of the year. But that's what this document that was handed out to us, I think it was at our desk, the interim superintendent pay considerations, and that would be a conversation that we would have, that we should have if this is the direction that we're going to head with Ms. Pastor. And I think we need to discuss sort of rates and kind of where we want to meet with that. I think that would be the next step if we're in agreement.
So tonight, can we get a consensus? Yeah.
I don't think that's appropriate for a work session to make a decision and take a vote.
A consensus to see if we're going to move it, to find a direction, if we're going to start looking or look at the appointment process?
Yeah,
I think that would be appropriate to come to another meeting as an action item. I don't know that it would be appropriate to make a decision right here.
So what would the action item be? Would it be either or? We need to have some direction.
just gonna put an action item on, you put an action item to approve Jill as the Ms. Pastor as the superintendent, and then I guess we
Yeah.
can,
I think you would need some negotiations in terms of the contract before that happened. If the level of comfort is with an action item, it could be, help me out, Mr. Craig, an action item to post it externally or not.
Yeah, I would suggest that the appropriate action item would be to either offer the position internally or go for an external search. I think that would be the appropriate action item. And then once we determine which way we want to go, whether that's, again,
I'm not sure why we
I know
can't do
we've
that
had-
here.
because it's a work session item, it's not an
We've
action
done
item.
consensus before, that's why I brought it up, because we give direction that way. I mean, we don't have to.
You can give direction, but not make a formal decision. And I think deciding to offer a position would be a formal decision.
Not a formal
That's-
decision, that's,
Madam President, may I?
Mr. Green.
I don't think that's what we're saying. We're saying, are we going to have a consensus whether we are going to use an outside search engine or not? Or are we going to stay within? I'm not so sure why we can't do that in a work session.
I don't think anybody agreed with going to an outside search engine. I think the possibilities are either an external posting or internally offering it to Ms. Pastor. I think those are our two choices, and I think that choice should be made as an action item. That's my opinion. I don't know.
That's a definitive action item.
That's fine.
All we were doing is getting the consensus, but if you don't want the consensus, we can just move it.
What would the consensus be? To do one of those two
Well,
things?
yeah, one of the
That would be
two.
taking an action. Doing one of those two things would be taking an action.
We've taken
That would be
consensus
appropriate
before.
for an action
Yeah.
item.
We've taken consensus motions before on things in
So
work
what's the difference
sessions.
between
So
now
what's the
and
difference?
any other time?
I think that even if you arrived at consensus, that you would want this as an action item.
Yes.
Because I think that at the next board meeting, that all of you may want to, in a public setting, by roll call vote, decide whether or not you believe that the direction should be to post this externally or consider an internal candidate. And then once you made that decision, if the decision was to post it, then we get busy doing that. If the decision is to move to an internal candidate, then you start negotiations with Ms. Pastor.
Okay, because I was told that we were going to have this discussion because you needed direction as soon as possible, so that's why the natural step was to kind of get a consensus on
We've
what we're
taken-
thinking.
We've taken consensus at work sessions before, but it's for things that don't require an action item. I don't believe we've ever had something that requires an action item be accomplished through a consensus at a work session. I could be wrong, but I don't believe that's ever happened. I think the instances where we've taken a consensus in a work session has been where Ms. Cretion's brought us something saying, I don't really need your approval for this. I'm just letting you know, and I'll do it differently if somebody is really loud and says differently, or if the group says differently. Am I misspeaking, or?
No.
Okay. So I think this is an action item. It's necessary that this is an action item. I'm not opposed to it. Don't misunderstand me. I don't want to do this wrong.
That's fine.
And I think it's appropriate to do it as an
Procedural type of-
action. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
I'm good with that. We can just.
And you are correct. I did open this conversation with some sense of urgency, but I opened it fully expecting that there would be an action item on the next board meeting.
I guess I'm confused. I mean, I feel like it just wasted our time then, because we're talking about this in a work session already. I would think we would come to some sort of consensus of what to put on an action item, instead of putting two different things on an action item. Are we gonna do something internally or externally? I mean, that's what a work session is for, is to work that process out.
And bring it to
And then
action.
bring it to action. That's how I feel. But I'm good either way.
If you want to ask what action you would bring, I guess mine would be in favor of an internal action, but I can't take that action right here.
And then afterwards, if we decide to go internal, then we go to a closed meeting to discuss the contract negotiations. And we have to call it for a special meeting for that.
I don't know that,
Not close.
I don't know that it's appropriate
For
to.
contract negotiations?
No,
If we-
there was no closed session for that before. There was a little bit different process, but,
Not for the position, but for the contract, it's different.
no,
For the
I never
person.
went into no closed session. I was offered a contract. And the person who was Mr. Grusecki, helped negotiate the contract between the Board of Education and myself.
We went into closed session at some point.
We would be allowed to go into a closed session to discuss contract negotiations.
Right. And we did.
Yes, we would be allowed to go into,
Okay.
into closed session to discuss contract negotiations. That would be appropriate. How yours happened, I don't know. It would happen
Yes,
before
no,
me,
the board, but the current superintendent was the mediator between myself and the Board of Education. I wasn't in a closed session with the Board of Education.
Okay, so what is the action item going to look like then for the next meeting? Is it going to be options?
I guess I would ask Ms. Creation to bring an action item to appoint Ms. Pastor as the interim superintendent. We've already done that, so I don't know what else we're doing.
That's why we were seeking a
I don't know what
consensus,
else we're
because now we
doing at
have
that
one
point.
board member that's saying, this is what we'd like to do. So
Well,
there's going to be two options unless we give her direction.
You could make the action item to post it internally, and it could either live or die with a vote. And then you have to move on to the second part. So if you were opposed to that, you'd vote no?
I guess I'm caught between the rock and the hard place, because I see Ms. Creation's need for the speed of this, but I also would like to give Ms. Pastor an opportunity to do the job for a little bit before we make her decide if she wants it.
So let me just.
So I'm kind of stuck on what's the best method.
Let me pose a question to you. For perspective, did you ever entertain the notion of giving me the job for a little bit to see if I really wanted it?
I wasn't here for that.
It doesn't happen.
And you were not internal. We didn't have that option with you
Okay.
because you were an external candidate. I mean, we have that option with Ms. Pastor because she's internal.
And we're under the gun.
But that's just my opinion. If everybody else is of the opinion that this should be offered and decided right now, then
I am not urging this to
Procedural
be an
side.
action item. I'm trying to hear the voice of the board and give you some options.
Right. Mr. Coopser, did you?
Thank you, if I could, thank you, Madam President. As relates to Mr. Craig's concept or idea, I wanted to hear Ms. Pastor's perspective as it relates to, do you have any real interest in trying this out? In terms of, Mr. Craig was saying something about this idea of being fair to not only the board, but also to you. Do you find that you have this desire for this kind of, or no? As a kind of, is that one-sided really from the board perspective?
So I guess what I would say is that I am not going to live and breathe being superintendent for 30 days and say I wouldn't do it because of the beliefs that I have in the district. I couldn't quit. I feel like I have been asked to serve, and I would serve in the best capacity. May not make the best decision every moment of every day, but that would be how I would learn to but I would not serve 30 days or 60 days and tell you that I wasn't interested. That's just not who I am. I was a teaching principal. I actually taught full-time and helped run a building before I became half-time teacher or half-time principal as the building was growing. And there were tough days. I think it's going to be tough. I don't know everything that Ms. Cretion deals with on a regular basis, and that would be a learning curve. Am I advocating that I go straight to that? I'm not. I just want to tell you that 30 days would not break a decision from me. If it's this board's desire to serve to ask me to serve as superintendent, then the 30 days, I would not say no after 30 days.
So can we just put on the action item, appoint Jill Pastor?
Post internally.
You
Or,
have to offer the job.
To post internally,
you're-
I believe that's the
offering the position.
procedural order is to post it internally, and then the second part of that would be to,
No, we
We don't have to.
That's a language,
No, we-
that's a
we
language
could-
thing. You,
we
the
could-
board
we
can,
could-
you guys can do whatever you want.
We don't have to
We
post
can-
anything.
I
We
I'm
can
probably-
directly offer the position. If that's-
We can
if that's-
directly
if
offer
that's
the
the
position.
motion, that's fine.
right.
I,
The motion is to directly offer
My-
the position, I'm okay.
Right, my thinking is that if we put the motion on the board, the action item for, to keep it all on the up, doing
wanna-
everything procedurally the right way, to make an action item to
Offer the position.
offer the position to Joe Pastor pending an agreement on a contract. I think you have to put the pending in the agreement on a contract in there. I think that has to be part of that. And then that eliminates maybe this
Yeah.
intermediate stuff, and we're eliminating a step. If she's adamant that she wants it, we could put it on an action item and have other discussion if we want to, and vote on it and follow the procedures the right way, as Mr. Craig has pointed out.
I did get an attorney opinion, and the attorney opinion is the board can do as they wish. The point was made, and we've accomplished that tonight, that it's very important that a public meeting hold a discussion about, so that the public who voted you into office understands how you feel and what you're, what you considered and what you didn't consider. That part has happened. So from this point forward, you can handle the action as you wish.
Right.
And I guess that was my point, is I didn't want it to appear as though we've all talked individually at some point, which, most of us have. And some of that needs to be made in public, and that's what I was trying to do tonight.
So I would like to bring at the next meeting an action item that recommends an appointment of Ms. Pastor as the permanent superintendent. Debate and vote as you will.
Yes.
At that point, whatever happens, happens, and Mr. Moran and I will post the job if that's the will of the board, and if it's not, then Ms. Pastor and I will set up a schedule for her to start shadowing me and working with me, and then Mr. Moran and I will post, our obligation is to post internally for the position of curriculum director. That's what will
And that
happen.
doesn't need to be approved by us?
No,
Okay.
that's a contractual item, so.
And that's the feel of the board, so that's what you can do. Put that on the action item for the next meeting. I'm good with that. Mr. Green?
Real quick, in this process, then, at what point can we start to negotiate a contract with her after the action item? I mean, this is...
You want to?
Right, well, I understand that. What I'm saying, I guess that's more of a question, for Jill, is, the way this is going to be worded should be pending the agreement of a contract.
Yes, I
Yes.
will include
Okay,
that.
all right.
I will
Yeah.
include that.
Okay. That sounds good.
I think later there'd be an action item that says that we offer the position.
And accepted the
Right.
terms.
Well, yeah, that's-
Accepted it,
that's-
we have
that's
to-
when the-
yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, at
So
that point.
It'd be a final action. that says-
Well, it's, at that point, we're approving a contract.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so
$2. Just kidding.
So it's 9:10, and we have one board member missing. Do we want to review the board goals, or do you want to come back with a compiled list? It's already late. I don't know how deep we want to get into the board goals.
Could we at least read them?
Yeah.
Just here, I haven't really read through everyone's and just,
Okay, I'll start off with mine because mine's first. I had a SMART goal. The first one is student achievement. We're committed to student success, so with the right conditions in the schools, you're likely to find higher levels of student achievement. The buildings may provide a pleasant and positive environment, positive interaction between school staff and students, being available and helpful, encouraging more choices at the curriculum level in middle and high school with updated resources and options for courses. So I also listed measures and relevance and achievable items for that. But that's for student achievement. And the other one I have is processes and procedures. Specific goal would be to ensure all buildings are following the same processes for discipline, communication, and incident reporting within the district. The process will organize what we do and how we do it, and all stakeholders will know what the policies are for any action. If there's any questions, they can follow the steps. Or if there's any disorganization, they can bring it back to the policy committee. All buildings will follow the same protocol, streamlining reporting and communications. So those are the two SMART goals that I placed on for the two goals that we discussed. And Andy?
Just adding on to the SMART goals, the board policies, is that we're just in the process of always reviewing and checking ourselves as a board, also to review our policies and procedures from our current bylaws to be brought back to the full board, make sure, and are they measurable, that we mark them as updated or revised, such procedures from the committee and with the consent of the full board. Attainable, absolutely, it's attainable to review processes over a period of time of the next 3 months, which line up with the existing and changing laws that are currently in education.
Thank you. So Mr. Koopser and Mr. Estheimer, you worked on the visibility and marketing goals.
Can you read them?
Yes, please.
Okay. They're kind of one after another, starting with visibility. So this is a board goal to help provide visibility for both the schools, to have a relationship with board members, but also for board members to be more, have more insights as to the needs and challenges in the district. The school board will do as follows. In each of the fall and winter semesters of the 2017-18 school year, each member of the school board shall meet with the principal of the school which they are liaison to. The discussion will include the current challenges, recent successes, and current activities in the school. This may include meetings with teachers as they are available, or a very brief visit to a couple of classrooms. Number 2, in the fall and winter semesters of the 2017-18 school year, each member of the school board of education shall attend a PTO meeting of the school in which they are liaison to. The discussion will include understanding levels of parent and teacher engagement, a calendar of events and activities, and any challenges or derailers to successful PTO activities in the school. As it relates to marketing the marketing aspect, by the end of the 2017-18 school year, the Southgate School Board of Education shall work with the district to develop a brand standards manual. This manual may provide direction related to, but not limited to, the district, school, and athletic logos, including associated font, logo size minimums, framing, element spacing, size ratio, horizontal or stacked format, surrounding clear space, color black and white, appropriate color backgrounds, location, use on apparel, location, use on documents, district primary and potentially secondary color palettes, district letterhead, graphic components of imagery, digital design guidelines, and typography for the fonts. Those were the...
Just to kind of add to that, at the MASB Fall Conference, there's a workshop that's called Mascots, Branding and Marketing Your District. That's on a Friday. Okay, Mr. Craig or Mr. Freitas, transportation goal?
Do you want to go ahead, Neil?
I think it's pretty obvious that Mr. Craig and I don't get paid by the word, because ours is straight into the point. Our transportation goal,
Specific, remember? Smart.
our transportation goal is The goal is to determine the cost of and possible funding source over the next 6 months to reinstate student transportation in the district.
Do you want to add to that?
So, yeah, so basically, we tried to, encapsulate all of the SMART objectives into that one phrase. And what we're looking to do is, over the next 6 months, identify the cost and the funding source, not restore. This branches into many, many other questions about how and what and where. There's many things to do with that, but we would like to try and determine what the costs are of those options and possible funding sources for those options over the next 6 months. And I think that's something that is attainable. That's going to lead to other paths. That's going to lead to many other questions and, maybe some tougher decisions. But that, unless you know the cost and the possible funding source, you can't make those other decisions. So I think that's the start of the goal, is to lay that stuff out and have that information in one easily identifiable form. Then we can start making some decisions.
And so we have Plant Moran coming for the RFP, so we can look more into that.
So next steps with these, if I can ask, I'm sorry, Madam President, as it relates to, should we review them and say, hey, I like the way these are written, and we as a board, we agree to each of these, and that's what we're gonna move forward with? Or if you have any input, we provide that maybe at the next meeting, as it relates to what these are, and then we say, okay, these are our goals, and kind of, or do, at
Yeah.
that work session next
Yeah, that
meeting,
sounds
just,
good.
you
And
know.
whether we want to see the layout of the SMART goals, just so we can have it on paper, or if we just want it simpler, or we can just kind of review it from there.
I think maybe one at a time would be, there's essentially 5 of them. I think, or 4, is that what we did? 4?
Some are together.
Yeah,
so.
some are together, so I think maybe we pick one of those goals and we try and really get it to something that everybody agrees with, rather than just
That's a
pairs
good
of
idea.
us.
That's a better idea.
Rather than just pairs of us, and then we say, yes, that's what as a group we agree with, and then,
Would you be comfortable with me starting with the transportation, since that
Oh, right.
RFP is coming up? And
Yeah.
I can take this format and divide them out, and then have them ready on an ongoing basis to discuss at a work session as we have the time. My only other question is, do you have any interest, do you need this in a Google Doc? Would you make comments in a Google Doc, or is that just something that's more time consuming than you would probably, I don't know if that's
I
helpful or
won't.
not.
I will. I will too. I'll make comments in a Google
I said I
Doc.
won't, but. I'm sorry.
I will do that.
Always in Google Docs. I live in Google Docs.
I think it's a robust conversation that everyone can be part of.
Okay, if there's nothing else, isn't anything else, can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
All in favor?
All in
All in
favor,
favor?
signify by saying aye.
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 Good night.
You're welcome to.